Hello and welcome to my channel Bevvy with Beth. I'm Beth and today I am drinking, it's delicious, it's a Darjeeling Fop, which is a flowery orange Pekoe. For anybody in the know of tea leaf grading, it means it's pretty damn good. And we got it in the Cotswolds 2 years ago, actually it was so long ago. And it's a loose leaf tea, so I've just popped it in my little tea strainer, and I'm going to be drinking this because I've got a lot to say. So grab yourself a drink and let's have a look at some good foods to eat. So today I want to talk about finding the right foods to eat when you have insulin resistance. So rather than do a what I eat in the day video, giving you a rough idea of what I eat during the week, which is not going to be helpful for a lot of people. I've got dietary restrictions. I eat the same things a lot. I'll tend to have like a month or 2 months where I tend to just eat the same things all the time, which for most people is really boring. And I don't want to just sit here and give you a list of foods. Go, yes, you can eat this and you can't eat that. As you know, I'm not a registered dietitian or a doctor. So to really give people a list of food to or not to eat would be irresponsible of me, basically. So instead I'm going to talk you through ways that you can learn what food you're eating, how it's affecting your body, and then you'll have to do your own research in, okay, I've picked this item, what's in it and how does it work. But it means you can look at foods that either you're already eating or that you want to eat or you know you should eat, and make sure that they are things you should be eating, and take a look at things that you've avoided in the past that actually maybe might be good for you. So I'm going to start by talking about the glycemic index. So good. So the glycemic index is basically a measurement that they've done where they measure the blood sugar level 2 hours after consumption of a certain product, and measured it on a scale between 1 and 100, and 100 being pure sugar. So they give someone some pure sugar, 2 hours later their blood glucose is at a certain level, and then they do an apple and they say, okay, well, if their blood glucose is now at this level, that means it's got that much sugar in it. And that's basically how they work it out. So I don't know like how accurate that is or not, because I think it sounds a little too similar to the whole BMI thing. So it's obviously, our bodies are always so much more complex, so it's really difficult for us to break it down in such simple terms, but it will at least give you a gauge, some sort of gauge as to how much sugar is in a food. So you've also got to consider different types of sugars. So you've got obviously pure sugar, your glucose, your fructose. That's fairly easy. That will give a very clear indication from blood sugar levels 2 hours after. There'll be a change, and that'll be fairly accurate. But you've got two other kinds of sugars to consider. The first one is starch. I was going to talk about starch because I think it's the least understood, because we're talking now more about carbs rather than just sugar. So starch is contained within what we call complex carbs. And so what happens is these starches within the complex carb, our enzymes convert into sugar. So they are sugars. As far as our body is concerned, they will be sugar. But because they're contained within complex carbs and they require the enzyme process to become sugars, it tends to mean that they have they don't have these massive spikes like you would get with high pure sugar foods, and it tends to last for a lot longer. So it's a much more stable source of sugar for our bodies when our bodies work normally. If you then think about our main issue, which is an insulin response, if you're going to have a product that turns into sugar, it's going to need that insulin, so it's going to create an insulin response in our body, but it happens slower. So that little bit of sugar instead of being instantly released into our bloodstream for our insulin to react to, we get a longer period of time where just a little bit of sugar is being released. But of course, if you saw my previous video, then you know that what happens is we release insulin and it doesn't work. So then we release more insulin. So this is now prolonging that problem, because we're going to release a little bit of insulin to get rid of that little bit of sugar that's been made already from the starch, and that's not going to work. So we're going to release more, and then not much long after that, we're going to need a little bit more for the new sugar that's just been converted. And so suddenly, I mean, as far as I can tell from what I understand of how our body is processing the sugar and the issue that we have, starch is probably the worst thing that we can eat. So a lot of things like oats and cereals, those things that are supposed to fill you up for longer because that blood sugar is more stable, is probably the worst thing for us to eat. In my opinion, my biggest advice would be to go and try it. If you currently have porridge for breakfast every morning with some fruit, stop having that. Have something that's incredibly low carb, low starch, and see if your energy survives for longer during the day. And if you find there's an improvement but you're not sure if that's what it is, well, then reintroduce those starches back in again, give it a try. What happens? Okay, now I'm getting to 9 o'clock in the morning after my breakfast at 7 and I'm starving hungry again. Well, that's probably because your body is saying, I'm not getting the energy that I need out of the food that you've provided me. So starches are another thing to look into when you're picking your foods. I would say definitely for the start of your day. It's so important for us, if we are having breakfast, to have the right kind of breakfast, because it really does set you up for the day. And then of course, if you're doing any form of intermittent fasting, or you just don't eat breakfast in general, then you want to be looking more closely at your lunch. That first meal, whenever it is in your day, that first meal needs to be able to set you up for your energy. And if you're having high blood sugar spikes and constant insulin releases, then your energy is not going to be great during the day. You want to look at something that's going to keep that much more stable for us as a metabolically deranged person. And then of course you've got your fibre. So fibre is completely indigestible in the human body. We don't digest it, it goes straight out. So fibre is good for us at certain levels, because it'll help really support our digestive system to keep moving. And so if you cut fibre completely out, unless you're then eating a lot of oils and things to keep things again moving, then you might struggle with that. But although they are a type of sugar, because we don't digest them, it doesn't go into our bloodstream. It won't cause an insulin response, and we can just kind of keep that on. So particularly when it comes to fruits, you want to be looking at fruits that are high in fibre, because that will help you to get the nutrients that are still in the fruit, but at the same time not absorbing quite so much of the sugars. So then obviously I looked at some high GI foods and some low GI foods. And I found it really interesting. Obviously, I'd looked at this before, but I haven't looked at it, well, in about a year. So I found it quite interesting, the results that we got. So it's fairly obvious when it comes to the high sugar, the high GI. Basically, they have to score more than 70. So like I said, 100 is pure sugar. So anything that's 70 or above is very high in sugar. So that's considered a high glycemic index food. And they've got a list here of what those things are. I just Googled that, what high GI foods. And the list that it came up with here, we've got watermelon at 72, honey at 73, donuts at 75, French fries at 76, white rice at 89, all cereals at 76, millet at 71, and white bread at 71. So these are some fairly obvious things for us to immediately avoid, or certainly cut down, sorry, I mean. So things like watermelon and honey, for example, may have other benefits other vitamins and minerals that if you're going to cut it out, check what you're getting from that and make sure that you're getting it from a lower sugar source. I made this mistake when, for totally different reasons, I cut out kidney beans, and that turns out to have been my main source of iron. I then became incredibly anemic because I was looking at the whole sugar, fibre, that kind of thing, and decided I needed to cut down. I needed to cut down my fibre intake, and kidney beans were my main source of fibre, so I cut those out, but also cut out all the iron that they were giving me. So learn from my mistakes. If you're gonna cut some food out, make sure that if you're gonna cut it out completely, that what else you're getting from that food, because food is never just one thing. Make sure that you're replacing that with a different item, or if you find that you're cutting out so much sugar elsewhere, that you can continue to eat that one thing that does have sugar in it because of all the other benefits. So you really have to kind of judge that for yourself. Don't just look at sugar. If you look at something and it's high sugar, then have a look at what else is in it before you decide whether or not to cut it out completely. So of course I did then also look at low GI foods, because of course if things are low in sugar, then they're probably going to be good for us to eat. And I found this, and incredibly, I don't think I looked at this last time. I was just interested in the high foods. I think I was fairly confident that I could, wrongly so, but I was fairly confident that I could work out what a low sugar food would be, because it's a lot of them have that on the packaging anyway. The first thing that I noticed when I looked at this list was that, unlike the high GI foods, where it gave you a very clear list of numbers, their actual score on that list, these low GI foods, they don't have a number. I couldn't find their numbers. I mean, I probably could have done a slightly deeper search, a more specific medical search, but I'm talking about information that we can just get hold of. We can just Google and get hold of the information so that we know. I don't have time to do massive research on studies and documents and spend 3 hours a day on the web just trying to find out a piece of information for you. Unfortunately, I'm here to just talk as a normal person who works full time. How can I help myself here? And this wasn't a very helpful list. It contains here the first list that it came up with. I've got here oats, milk, chickpeas, carrots, kidney beans, and lentils. They're all put down as low GI foods, and yet, other than milk, they're all high starch. Oats are not a good thing for us to eat. Kidney beans aren't great. Chickpeas aren't really not good. And lentils have a pretty high insulin response. I mean, carrots are probably the best thing that's on that entire list, and milk, it's got the lactose in it, so I mean that's something I avoid anyway, but it tends to be a fairly lower insulin response. And obviously then milk probably also includes a lot of other dairy products, so obviously butter really doesn't have any lactose in it at all, so that's a very low insulin response food. And so I was a bit disappointed with that recommendation, because these items would not be great to eat actually when you're looking at trying to avoid insulin responses. So this is one of the biggest problems that I have found with getting my own information, is that they're looking at these foods from a normal metabolic point of view. And when you have a deranged metabolism, whether that's insulin resistance, PCOS, or type 2 diabetes, you really have to look at insulin and the response, not just the sugar that's in food, because our bodies are so much more complicated than just sugar, insulin. That's not what happens. As I said, we already looked at starches, and how actually that's probably even worse than a high sugar thing, because It is a longer period of time where our body's trying to compensate, trying to perform an action that our body is incapable of doing. So and they haven't listed anything here, nothing here that is actually sugar free. We haven't got meats listed here. What about eggs? Where are those things that genuinely don't have any? I mean, they must be the lowest things. So I think this is actually providing me things that, in order to come under the low, sorry, I should have said this before, because I said that high has to be at 70. Well, low has to be 55 or below. And I wouldn't be surprised to find all of these items are around 50 in this GI index. So they're not actually the low foods, if you see what I mean, in the same way as the list we've got at the top here with your donuts at 75 and your white rice at 89. They're clearly going to be some of the highest GI foods, especially as they've kind of covered there the watermelon, the honey, donuts and french fries. They're kind of looking at fruits, sugars and fast food. So we already know that they're pretty high, so that I'm fairly confident that's a good indicator of high GI foods, and that's why they've provided numbers. The low GI foods, I'm fairly certain, are foods that only just come under that 55. And so they're only just considered low GI foods. And so for anybody, for a diabetic or for somebody with insulin resistance, they're still not going to be good enough. And there are a lot. I mean, I know, again, these lists are very condensed. They weren't supposed to be a comprehensive list of foods, but when you're looking at low GI foods, there are definitely foods that are lower than oats and carrots. So why weren't they provided? And I think that's one of the biggest problems that we with metabolic syndrome face, is that the idea of being on a low sugar diet is not encouraged, not promoted. And so it's what we have to do. I'm not saying I think everybody should do it, but when you have insulin resistance, you can't eat a normal sugar diet. Even if you had what people with normal metabolic conditions would consider low sugar, it's still too high for us. It's why I ended up being a lot better, because I was on a lower sugar diet, but I was still eating too much sugar for my body because I can't process it at all. So it's really difficult to find the information that you need to get this diet right. So research is really important. And so again, when you're looking at cutting something out of your diet or adding something into your diet too, always do a little bit of extra research, and don't just look at sugar in, but also look at the other nutrients, the minerals, the vitamins, and make sure that if you're going to add something or cut something out, that it's going to be healthy for your body overall, rather than just focusing on the one problem. So that's kind of my explanation. The best thing to do would be to look at what you're eating already. So I did this by not changing my diet at all and simply recording. I made a spreadsheet, and I would record the sugar. I would have an item of food and I'd Google it and say how much sugar is in this item, input the amount of sugar, and then look at what I had. And I was on between 350 and 400 grams of sugar a day. So that's not the added sugar, which still would have been very high. I can tell you, that it was still high, but it was also including all of my fruit, which again was a lot. So I was on, that's kind of a normal, not a normal level. I was fairly normal. It was still high-ish for somebody who was trying to have a healthy diet. So people who aren't on any kind of eating regime at all, they're not doing a diet plan, they are just eating what they want to eat. In the Western world tends to be between 300 and 400 grams of sugar a day. So I wasn't eating that abnormally as such, but it was from there that I was then able to say, okay, if I'm eating a red apple, I used to eat an apple every single day. I don't want to give up my apples. What's the best alternative? Okay, how much sugar does a green apple have? Turns out quite a bit less than a red apple. Okay, simple swap. Now, instead of having a red apple, I have a green apple. So although I'm still having some sugar, it's a lot less, and I cut things down. I looked at things like potatoes and rices and those kind of things that we know are starchy and so create a insulin response. And I looked at alternatives to doing things like brown rice instead of white rice, and doing sweet potatoes instead of white potatoes, and all those things to help cut it down. And then once you make those little changes, then you can start making the big changes. So then you can start maybe cutting out fruit altogether, or, you know, you can reduce the sugar in your tea and coffee. You can stop having cereals for breakfast, and start having eggs and bacon, or, you know, yogurt and fruit or whatever, and make those changes. And again, you can cut it down gradually. It doesn't have to be overnight you stop eating sugar. And definitely recording what you're eating already, I found really helpful when it came to making the changes, because it gave you a non-scale measurement. Basically, you weren't looking at how much weight have I lost. You weren't even really looking at how much faster I can walk. You're looking at how much am I consuming, and then you know that you're consuming so much less. And it was surprising at how quickly I could get that 350 gram measurement down to 50 grams a day, just with a little bit of thought. So it's definitely possible to start looking at things with that amount of detail, and change your diet fairly drastically just by educating yourself, basically. So I definitely recommend doing that, having a look at what foods you're eating normally and what sugars are in them, and then looking at what replacements you can, you know, as in, you know, what similar items with a lower sugar level can you eat. I looked a lot at actual sugars as well. That, of course, I mean, it's an obvious one. Don't need so much sugar. But little things like, did that mean I couldn't have cakes ever? I really like coffee, but I don't really like it without sugar in it. What sugar could I put in that would generate a lower insulin response, would be lower on that GI index, but would still provide me with the sweetness? So I started using coconut sugar in my baking instead of normal sugar. So although I was still having a cookie, so I was still having sugar, it was a lot less sugar than I had been having before. And then with my coffee, I was using maple syrup. And I would put 2 teaspoons of maple syrup in instead of 3 teaspoons of sugar in. And actually, that was a really good combination, because I really like the flavour of the maple syrup with the coffee. So those aren't the only options. Some people might not like the coconut sugar. Some people might really not like the taste of maple syrup. So I'm not saying those are the things that you have to use. I personally am pretty against fake sugars. I cannot. They're disgusting. I can't do diet lemonade because all I can taste is aspartame. I can't do sugar-free mints because it's the same thing. All I taste is that sweetener. It's blah. Even stevia. I just can't do it. So I had to find sugar alternatives, and so finding something that was lower in the GI was definitely very helpful, and it helped me to still eat things that I enjoyed whilst at the same time not damaging my body so much. So definitely look into alternate sugars if you don't want to just cut them out and use sweeteners, which is probably the best way to deal with the insulin, although make sure that you're okay with that. It's really tricky because I don't know how many people are going to have, with insulin resistance, you don't get a glucose monitor. Obviously with diabetes you would. So I don't have a glucose monitor, so I don't tend to know what my glucose level is. I just tend to know how I feel. But I know that there are people who will get an insulin response from some fake sugars, and it's obviously different for everybody because we're all unique human beings. So you don't always know which sugars you will and won't react to. So that's a bit of a process as well. So for me, it was much simpler with not liking sugars, fake sugars, and not knowing which sugars I would and wouldn't react to, was instead to look for alternate sugars so that I could try and reduce the amount that I was eating, lower my insulin response. And that did very naturally. I'll go into a video a bit more about, you know, my diet process in that way. But having those small changes kind of weaned me off the sugar and those crazy cravings and overeating that we get by providing a more lower insulin response for similar taste. Really helped me to wean off that sugar, and then I just ended up having less and less and less of it because I didn't need it in that same way. So yeah, finding alternatives, swapping high GI foods for low GI foods, but not those low GI foods, because we need to consider starch. So again, like I said, just double look into it. Don't just go, oh, low sugar, yeah, that'll do. No, check the fibre. Maybe something that says it's high sugar, maybe actually a lot of that is fibre, and so wouldn't be such a bad response. You know, swapping an orange for a banana, you know, they're going to provide different responses in our body, and then you do just have to do a bit of experimenting. If you you know, if you cut out your sugars and you go into fake sugars, sweeteners, that's the word. Why do I keep saying fake sugars? Sweeteners, that's what they're called. If you decide to use sweeteners instead of sugar alternatives, then, you know, again, check your responses. Use a sweetener that maybe you like the taste of, but if you're not feeling that much better, then try a different sweetener. Maybe you might find that you react to that better, and then you do start feeling the benefit of not eating that sugar. Do a bit of experiment and see how it goes. Please let me know how your experiments go, what things you're thinking of trying, and how it went. You know, did you change your breakfast from porridge with honey and swap it in for some bacon and eggs, and suddenly you find that now you've got energy until lunchtime and you don't need to have that mid-morning snack? I'd love to know how you got on with it, because everybody's journey is different, but we can all learn from each other. So to kind of exchange those stories and experiences and experiments is one of the best ways that we can learn together as a community. So leave me a comment down below. Obviously like this video if you found it helpful, and I will be doing a lot more videos like this that go into detail on how best to not control, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, live with, how to cope with your insulin resistance, how to make the best out of the food that you're eating, as well as lifestyle. And then also I'll be sharing my journey. So hit subscribe so that you can catch all the videos that I make, and hopefully we can all learn together.